from, and welcome to this panel conversation that Cities Alliance is organizing, and it's titled Ghost Citizens, Women and Informality in Cities, What Can Europe Do? I'm very glad to be welcoming you today. And before I leave the floor to our very interesting speakers, let me just remind you a few housekeeping points. I would like to say that you can follow this event either here on Zoom or on Cities Alliance Facebook page. This event aims at being interactive. So if you have questions or comments for our speakers, feel free to use the Q&A section in the Zoom interface, or to add your comments to the live streaming on Facebook, and we'll make sure to convey your messages to our panelists. It is also a recorded meeting, and you'll be able to see the recording in the same Facebook page straight after the live streaming has been ended. We'll also make sure to share it with our Cities Alliance members. Now, I will leave the floor to the speakers, and I'll pass the baton to my colleague Giulia Maci, who is heading our Cities for Women Global Program at Cities Alliance. Over to you, Giulia.
Thank you very much, Giada, and welcome to everyone. I hope you can see my screen. So welcome to this seminar that follows a series of dialogues that we organized over the course of 2020 with European representatives on the new EU gender strategy and on the role of cities and local community in advancing gender equality locally. Today, we focus on the EU Gender Action Plan that has been recently presented by the European Commission. Right now, the European Parliament is preparing a report on this plan. This plan set the objective and the direction for all the external actions of the European Union, for the work of the European delegations that are now in the phase of developing their programs for the next 5 years, and also for the EU financial instruments, especially the INDICI, which is the instrument for the European external action. But we have a representative of the European institution that will explain better what the plan is about. Today, we focus on how the EU Gender Action Plan can be translated at the local level, at city level, cities where the majority, in fact, of people actually live, and targeting especially women living in the context of poverty, in context of informality. Informality, in fact, worldwide dominates both human settlements and local economy. So it's a reality, it's the big reality. And in some cities, informal employment reaches 80% of the working population. And women are overrepresented both in the informal economy, so they're more exposed to economic risk, to health risk, and also in the informal settlements. Women represent less than 15% of land and property owners worldwide. So they're more exposed also to evictions. And of course, they are represented in the informal, they live in informal settlements. But the informal settlements, so the informal economy are, in fact, we can say, adaptation strategies, ways in which communities, women, people fill gaps left by the market and public authorities that often don't have the means, the resources, the capacity to meet the growing demand of this growing urban population. So cities also are growing very fast. Demand for jobs, for a very young population, for women, jobs, services, housing. So the informality is really a reality that we need to, first of all, understand and to include in our policies, in our programs, in our projects. And when we talk about gender equality, this aspect, this reality, this complex reality needs to be taken into consideration, because really women are at the center of that. So really understanding the reality of women in many cities across the world. And we believe that really the EU, that also with Ursula von der Leyen, has put gender equality at the center of its work and its mandate, needs really to lead the way on that, giving also the example to other organizations, and with a specific investment and targeted program. We call them ghost citizens, because in fact they are citizens that are not often included in the city planning process, in policies, in the decision making, and we have to change that. So today we have a really diverse group of speakers, and we will try to focus on to understand better what the European Union is planning to do on gender equality, and specifically on cities and on women living in context of poverty, but also we'll focus on practical recommendations and example on how we can reach out on this group of population. So let me welcome our speakers. We start with Virginia Manzitti, which is the coordinator of the gender team at DG for International Partnership, INTPA, at the European Commission. So welcome, Virginia. Then we will have Charlotte Isaacson, which is a senior gender expert at the European External Action Service and principal advisor on gender. Then we will listen to Sarah Reed, which is the study coordinator at IGO, study coordinator of a study on the impact of COVID on informal workers in many cities across the world. Oksana Hubbud, which is the coordinator of StreetNet International. Alice Sverdik, which is a researcher at the International Institute for Environment and Development. And to last but not least, Maria Isabel Weiser, which is the vice director of Forhouse, a think tank in Geneva. And each of the speakers will give a different perspective and key also messages for the future work on gender equality and women empowerment in cities. Let me very briefly introduce the Cities Alliance. Maybe not all of you are familiar with our work. We are part of the United Nations. We are hosted by UNOS, but we are an international global partnership, including multilateral organization, member state, network of cities, association of civic society organizations, and academia. With our members really involving also the members at the local level, we focus on cities, especially secondary cities, small cities that don't have the resources and the political attention often, and we focus on including the urban poor into the policy and the city making. So this is our mission, and of course we work both at the country level. So we work on capacity development, citizen engagement. We develop plans and strategy at the city and national level, and we work on infrastructure and investment. And then the data, the knowledge that we gather from our local actions, we use that for our global action and global activity. So we have global programs where we focus on advocacy or on knowledge production, and we engage in political debates around, especially around urban issues. Gender is really at the center of what we do. So when we talk about urban poor and inclusive cities, of course, women are really at the center of this effort. And we do gender mainstreaming across all our actions, but we also have a dedicated program that I'm leading, which is the Cities for Women program. And we really focus on practical ways to include women in the planning and in the city making process, and making cities more responsive to women's needs, and by extension, more responsive and inclusive to everyone. Very briefly, at the moment, we are working in different countries. We are working also on different topics, like we develop a framework to monitor and to analyze the inclusion of women in their cities. We work on gender inclusive planning. We work on gender budgeting, public space interventions, gender-sensitive COVID responses, including also awareness raising in informal settlements, leadership training, focusing on women elected at the local level, and basic services, especially water, sanitation facilities, really focusing on women, mapping what the women need. For us, of course, the European Union, both at the delegation level and in Brussels, we have our headquarters in Brussels, I'm speaking from Brussels, is a key interlocutor for us. We are working with them. And so I'm very happy today to start and to give the floor to our first speaker, Virginia Manzitti, which will explain, give us a bit the framework, what is the EU Gender Action Plan, is the third one. So what is difference what is the difference between this one and the previous one, and what are the priorities and next step? Please, Virginia, the floor is yours.
So good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting us. I'm very pleased to be with you. I'm impressed by the organization and by the work you do. And GAP3 is starting to be implemented. So it's the right moment to meet and exchange. And I think really GAP3 is, how do you say in English, un chantier ouvert à tous, I say. We would like to see it really as an opportunity to work better together at country level, at regional level, and globally. So here we are in Brussels on our screens, but we really see GAP3 as a meeting place. So let me say a few words as an introduction, then I will speak on the main pillars of GAP3 and also share some info on where we are now with its implementation. So it was adopted in November. So we have done a lot of work in this intense inception phase. And Charlotte is Oksana, who will speak after me, will also complete on GAP3 and also tell us a bit on some political messages of GAP3 for the discussion today. So we all know that women are more likely to be in informal, temporary, part-time, and other sort of precarious employment, no social protection, they earn less. We know that they shoulder the burden of unpaid care and domestic work. And still we know all this, but preparing this morning when I saw the figures, 7 in 10 female workers are in the informal economy. You get, again, woke up, 7 out of 10. It's really impressive, and COVID has not at all helped. So we really feel, and we are kind of very much exposed to debate on how COVID has worsened the situation, how the very high risk involved in the pandemic. So informality, it's particularly risky and dramatic in urban setting. And we also know, the picture is clear, that urban inequality is very much gendered. So unequal access for women and girls to governance, to service, to mobility, to security, violence, access to health, all this has become very difficult in urban settings. And this is coupled with exponential growth of cities. So a lot of risk, a lot of challenge, but also a lot of opportunities. So we would like to see how GAP3 can help harness these opportunities. And we believe, we were discussing with colleagues working on urban development, that we need to work hand in hand and really to harness the synergy between these two work tracks. So let's say a few words on GAP3. So it built, and you might have been, I think you joined the stakeholder, or many of you might have joined the stakeholder consultation. You did, no? So we had this consultation. We also learned a lot of lessons from a very good evaluation who was finalized just in the final phase of its elaboration, which was in fact one of the best evaluation I've seen recently, so very useful and timely. So GAP3 builds on the experience of GAP2, but it comes with a huge advantage, which is perfectly fitting the new programming exercise. So when the previous gender action plan was running somehow after the programming, so the decision on the country allocation, where to put money, what to do, were already taken. Now the program is also starting. So we have a golden opportunity to have the objectives of GAP3 shape and influence what's happening in each country and at regional level. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this policy. This is it's a very intense and rich slide, so let me go through it briefly. No, the previous one, yeah. So 3 core principles, and this really reflects huge consensus coming out, emerging from the consultation. So addressing root causes of gender inequality, so the transformative approach, intersectionality, and the right-based approach. So these are the 3 cross-cutting principles. There are what we call the 5 pillars, and that tells a lot about the ambition of this policy. The first one is doing more in terms of number of action, so increasing action and boosting their quality, their effectiveness. And when we say increasing the number of action, we have a quantitative target to reach, which is that 8.5 out of 10, 85% of new action, and action means programs, will be either G1, so gender responsive, either G2, so gender targeted. So where gender equality and women empowerment is the main objective. And this objective is 85% is also in the global Europe. So it's legally binding somehow, and I can reassure you that it's taken very seriously in the systems. So everybody speaks in the house about 85%. So we really feel it's strongly somehow integrated. It's part now of the business. We have also a very interesting target, which is what we call the 5%, and it's also in the INDICI. So this target is about the fact that 5% of all the new action should be G2, so targeting gender equality as principal objective. And this means that in each country, we have another novelty of GAP3, is that in each country, there will be at least one program dedicated to gender equality, and which is absolutely new. When we say one program, it can be whatever, it can be a huge one, it can be a small one, but our ambition is to make them really catalytic, transformative, and to use this opportunity also to build knowledge and to trigger a debate at country level on how to best use this money and this opportunity. Second pillar is about the joint strategic engagement at country level, at regional level, and at global level. And we will see in the next slide what it means at country level. This is also important. We have 6 areas of engagement. You would recognize 3 of them are the classical ones, so freedom from violence, voice and empowerment, participation, and the economic and social rights. But you see that there are new ones. We have a women, peace and security agenda, which is fully integrated into GAP3. We have also sexual and reproductive health and rights, which is very visible. It was already in GAP2, but not as visible, and politically this is very important for us to have managed in times of backlash to put this on the agenda so boldly. And then there are two new areas, so green transition and digital transformation. So this is also very interesting for us to be able to gender mainstreaming strongly in this area, because a lot of money will go there now. EU lead by example is the fourth pillar. What it means in GAP 2, we were saying we promote an institutional cultural shift. So we need to change the mindset of organization. And now we make a step further. We say we should be credible and start by putting in order our house, and so lead by example. And this chapter integrates a new element, which is also the gender responsive leadership. So our manager, the head of delegation, head of cooperation are called to be gender responsive leaders, to be accountable for what they do and to operate as such. Accountability, of course, with a new spin, very different from GAP 2. So it's focused on result. We have a new reporting system. We will have a first report in 2023. And we want to focus on results. So GAP 3 is also composed by two documents. One is a joint communication, which has been developed by the EAS and by us jointly, really line by line, hand in the hand, and also by what we call the staff working document, which contains for each of the 6 area, the one you have on this picture, a list of objectives and of indicators. So I don't know if you are seeing it, but these two documents really reads together and should be looked at together. Next slide. Yeah, I wanted to speak a bit on the country level, because we are also very now active on programming at country level, and the Global Europe, the new name for the NDICI, now we call it Global Europe, is really about geographization. So at country level, we will have one clip. What is the clip? This is another new element, core element of GAP 3 is the country level implementation plan. So this is about contextualizing GAP 3 and having in each country a strategy to implement it, which will be drafted, is being drafted, because our delegation, our colleagues are busy these days drafting them, in cooperation with civil society organization, in close consultation with gender machinery, stakeholders, to set the objectives and the priorities area in each country. So very important, this clip. It's an opportunity for the policy to really land in each country and to make a difference, we hope. Then we have, of course, in each country this 85% objective. We also have a very important objective in terms of dialogue. So really strong, and we will really be accountable on it, to have more dialogue on gender equality with national stakeholders, but also more specific dialogue with civil society organizations. And civil society organizations are also specially targeted in GAP 3. There is also another indicator on measuring the increase in funding to women organizations. All this can happen also only if we have good gender analysis. So gender country profile, gender analysis are now boosted. Our colleagues are really busy updating them. In many countries, there is already, of course, something. We need to update and to complete. To complete, why? Because now we are going a bit out of the comfort zone of the previous GAP 2. So we are addressing women and digital, women and Green Deal. We are much more active on women, peace and security. So we are trying to extend the analysis in this area. Next slide. Yes, thank you. So this is a very short zoom in the clip. So importantly, is drafted in coordination with member states. So it should boost a bit the Team Europe spirit, working better together approach, but also with all sorts of stakeholders, including the international financial institution. So there is a lot of attention going on blending, on working on the private sector. So we want them to be part also of a conversation from the start. And the clip will also cover the political work. So not only the operational part, but also how we plan our dialogue, when we want to be active and vocal in dialogue. So try to structure the dialogue in each country and be prepared for it, anticipate. So the clip is a political and operational instrument. And it's really, for me, a huge opportunity for a new, really effective engagement on gender equality. And the last slide, it's about what's happening in 2021. So programming is ongoing. So our colleagues in delegation are now doing consultation for the clip. Not only for the clip, they are of course doing, they're very busy developing what we call the multi-annual indicative program. So this document that plan what we will do in the next 7 years throughout all our external action cooperation. So they are also very active in updating the gender country profile. They do so in cooperation with our stakeholders. So they are connecting with center of expertise, and I don't know, in countries where you are present, I hope they are also connecting with your colleagues or allies. But feel free to connect, to tell them, ask the EU delegation where they are in this, and if they need information. So they are gathering collective intelligence now on this. And by July, we will have the new MIPS. And I promise you that we are mainstreaming this MIP very actively. So we are very, very, I will say, ferociously gender mainstreaming this MIPS, and supporting our colleagues to develop the clips. So there are 2 working axes. Where we see that, for example, in a country it's clear the bulk of the money will go on digital or in Green Deal, we are preparing the gender sector analysis in this sector area. So this is a bit the area of work for the months to come. So on GAP3, I have finished. I prepared some example on concrete programs, but I don't want to take too much of your time. So let me know if I have already over my 7 minutes. I stop here.
Thank you. Maybe we can go back, I think, to the example. I think it would be very interesting to see also a concrete example. But I think the overview was very useful and very clear. So thank you for this. I have already some questions, but maybe we can keep it for later. So I would like to invite Mrs. Isaacson, which is a senior gender expert at the European External Action Service, to take the floor and to focus a bit on the priority and also the relation between the European Gender Action Plan with some specific focus on women living in context of poverty.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to this event. And I will be very brief because I know that there are many colleagues who, including Virginia again, who have many really important things to share. So as I come from the External Action Service, I also want to give a little bit more the political flavor to the GAP3, which I totally agree with Virginia. We have never been in a better place than we are right now in terms of actually taking big steps forward on the implementation of EU policy and achieving gender equality and women's empowerment, etc. So everything is arranged for us, so to speak. And I think the clips are the key piece of the puzzle, but a very important piece of the puzzle. And one of the priorities in GAP3, which is emphasized much more than the previous policy, is that it is a more political document too. So the whole idea is that we will promote and achieve gender equality and work for women's empowerment with all EU instruments at play, such as political instruments, financial instruments, and also other forms of technical support, which includes of course, more traditional technical support in terms of capacity building, etc., but also a very active diplomatic activity in all our dialogues, in all our bilateral, regional and multilateral dialogues, as Virginia mentioned. This is a part of that, and you should know that gender equality and related matters, depending on where we are discussing in the world and the situation and context there, it is on the agenda all the time, which is different from how it was, a couple of years back. So I think I just wanted to share this with you as an example of how actually now the dots are actually connected in this more comprehensive implementation. So I just wanted to say something briefly about women's economic empowerment and women's participation, which are key priorities and objectives, of course, in GAP 3, based on both consultations and what evaluation said. But the clear objective is that women and girls should be able to participate equally in the public and the private spheres for democracy, for having economic empowerment, for the economy, of course, and to also fulfill the human rights of all. And we believe that it's a rights-based approach, but at the same time we also acknowledge the fact that it is in the best of all. So gender equality also comes with some beside the rights, of course, which is fundamental and most important. It also comes with some great benefits for many perspectives, democracy, as said, but for economy, but also for peace and security and sustainable development. So because of this, of course, empowering women is key also to reducing poverty and to see how there is so much power in parity and in gender equality, which also is considered by us and many other colleagues and partners being a key to prevent poverty or to address poverty. So this is important, and of course we are carefully reading and interacting with colleagues who are very much into this, and we have, of course, a constant dialogue with partners in other organizations working more on the economic side and to reduce poverty, not only the United Nations, but of course United Nations is at the front and center. So we know that we need to reduce poverty. We need to empower women. We need to put in place regulations and practices, for example, on property ownership, access to bank credit, inheritance rights, access to identification, that in many times, both in, I would say, urban and rural settings, are discriminating against women, and to make sure that we take away those obstacles so that the social protection and the human security of all, including of women, is put in place. And when we speak about human security, we also then include not only physical security, but also the rights, the economic security, the health, food security, etc., etc. So that is, of course, important to us. And this is really clearly defined in the objective, as an objective in GAP, and also supporting women's entrepreneurship, access to work, etc., and employment in different areas, not only traditional women areas, well considered like stereotypically as women areas, but also, based on the free choice, etc., and to acknowledge that the formal economy is leaning on the informal economy. So the prosperity of the formal economy or the productive economy wouldn't be possible if it wouldn't be for this reproductive economy. So this is key for us. The final thing I wanted to just touch upon is, of course, that also women's access to digital solutions is more important probably than ever, at least in light of the pandemic. And of course, this is also something that is it is a priority in itself with the digital transformation. It's its own objective in GAP, but of course, we also have to make sure that we fulfill these intentions to make sure that the digital access and literacy, etc., is equally distributed, so that women, for example, living in cities and in urban environments can access equally, as it is a key entry point for getting empowered and educated and also achieving gender equality. So I think I will stop there. But again, women's economic empowerment, women's participation in all sectors and spheres of life based on their own choice and the rights are key for us in urban settings and in cities, of course, but also in rural settings. So it's the same all over, but given different contexts, of course, we have to work differently in different ways to achieve that. So I stop with that, and also on instruments, perhaps I can come back later. I was asked about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Isaacson, for this overview, and also to highlight the political nature of this document. We really need to have political commitment on this, especially right now. We had a lot of improvement, I think, in terms of gender equality over the past year, but we feel at the same time also from our experience in cities that women's rights are also at the stake right now. So we need a power shift and cultural shift, and for sure political engagement and dialogue. And we have invited today WIGO, the representative from WIGO, which is a very powerful, it's our member, and it's a powerful network focusing on women in informal employment. So it's a global organization with local chapter. We're happy to have here today Sarah Reed, which conducted a study recently on the COVID impact on informal workers, because an organization such as WIGO could really give a contribution on exactly on this political engagement and political impact, also at the local level. Please, Sarah, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Julia. Thank you for having us today. So my name is Sarah. I'm the study coordinator on a global study that we've been working on of informal workers regarding COVID-19 impacts, which I will get into shortly. Just an introduction to WIGO. WIGO is a global network representing membership-based organizations of informal workers all around the world. Our team is composed of statisticians, lawyers, urban planners, labor unionists, and other social scientists who support WIGO's affiliate organizations to enhance the voice, visibility, and political power of informal workers who are their members. And the next speaker is Oksana Hubbud, who's the international coordinator of StreetNet International, which is one of WIGO's affiliates. So Oksana and I have coordinated to give a presentation and an introduction to the informal economy. So I will start off with a few definitions about what informal employment is and also what it is not. So the definitions on the screen are from the International Conference of Labor Statisticians, which is convened every 5 years by the ILO, and it guides national and global statistics on the informal economy. And I'll present some of those statistics shortly. Many people, it's very common to confuse the informal sector and informal employment. And these two terms are related, but they're not the same. So the informal sector refers to production and employment in unincorporated enterprises that are also unregistered with national authorities. So it refers to the unit rather than the individual, whereas informal employment refers to any kind of employment without social protection through that person's employment. And so it can take place both within the informal sector, if you work for an informal unit by yourself or as an employee, as a contributing family member, or it can also take place within the formal economy, within the formal economy. So if you were employed as a factory worker, but under conditions that were informal because you did not have social protection from your work, you are an informal worker as well. So given this, it's important to remember that the majority of the world's workforce is informal. The ILO puts that figure at 61%. So it means that those of us who work under formal conditions are really the exception, not the rule globally. But terms that are used to describe the informal economy, such as shadow economy or gray economy, are really misleading, and they're stigmatizing because they imply some kind of illegality, when really the majority of the world's workers who are informal workers are providing legal goods and services. So these stigmas are not just incorrect, but they can be really dangerous to workers' lives and livelihoods. It means that urban governments are often missing a really critical policy tool for addressing poverty, for addressing equality in cities. So as I mentioned, the ILO has global estimates on the share of informal employment globally. As I mentioned, 61% is the global figure, but this is considerably higher in developing countries at 90%, 67% in emerging economies, and in developed countries, it's almost at 20%, so still pretty significant. Globally, men have slightly higher rates of informal employment than women, but this changes if you look at developing countries, where women's rate of informal employment is higher. In emerging economies, lower rates of employment for women often reflects the fact that women are less likely to be engaged in any type of paid work. And it's also important to remember that women tend to be overrepresented in the types of work which are the lowest earning. So WeGo in our network focuses on supporting 4 groups of informal workers, which are among the largest globally. Home-based workers who produce goods and services from their homes, domestic workers, street vendors and market traders, and waste pickers. And in this slide, we have an image of a home-based garment worker from Tirupur, India, a domestic worker from Lima, Peru, and then on the right, a street vendor from Bulgaria and a waste picker from New York City, where I'm based. And I think this is an important reminder that while informal workers make up the bulk of the workforce in the South, they're an important component of our vulnerable workforce in the North as well. Domestic workers and home-based workers in particular are groups which are predominantly women, although in many parts of the world, street vending and market trade is also dominated by women. There are strong intersections between informal workers and racialized groups, migrant workers, religious minorities, so-called lower caste people, and even with ageism. There's also big overlaps between people who are informal workers and live in informal settlements, as I think our speakers will discuss later in the panel. And there's a strong link between informal employment and poverty, which is why improving the conditions and earnings of informal workers is so indispensable for poverty reduction. I think another important thing to note is that the groups shown here, home-based workers, domestic workers providing care, waste pickers providing sanitation, and street vendors providing food and necessities, were essential workers during the pandemic, whether or not they were always recognized as that by their governments. And of course, they have been catastrophically impacted by the pandemic, and I'll get into that a little bit now. So at the start of the COVID crisis, it was pretty widely acknowledged that informal workers were going to be severely impacted by economic restrictions because they lack social protection and because they earn on a day-to-day basis. And this was an important acknowledgement because in previous crises, informal workers have been largely kind of invisible to global policymakers. Women were also overrepresented in high-risk sectors, according to estimates from the ILO, which were put out at the beginning of the crisis. The ILO estimated that in the first month of the crisis, the earnings of informal workers decreased by about 81% in Africa and Latin America. So this is absolutely catastrophic. This is 80% of incomes for people who really depend on earnings on a day-to-day basis. The study that we did confirmed this in a more granular way. We found that among the 2,000 workers that we studied, 2,000 plus, average earnings in April were only 21% of pre-COVID earnings, very similar to the ILO findings. And that by mid-year, so June and July, when we surveyed them again, they were at only 55% of pre-COVID earnings. So the recovery was slow. And we'll be surveying the same workers again this year to find out how things have gone since then. So it's also, from our perspective, important to disaggregate sectors. And as I mentioned, home-based workers, which are among the most female workforces, had the highest drop in their earnings in April and the slowest recovery. But we can also look at gender within sectors where it's more equally distributed. So you can see that among waste pickers, women workers had lower earnings both at the beginning of the crisis and by mid-year. And this was also true for street vendors. And I think Oksana can speak a little bit more about some of the ways that street vendors are made so vulnerable. So just to wrap up, one other thing that we've been doing in this study, aside from tracking the impacts on workers, was to look at the kinds of demands that are being made by the organizations that represent them. And so we've compiled a quite specific list of demands that are coming from these 12 different cities, both to their national governments and their local governments. And so it gives a really interesting and I think quite instructive perspective on what workers really need, according to the organizations that actually represent them, with really concrete examples. So I think this is one of the most useful documents that we've produced, and I really recommend checking it out at the link at the bottom at bit.ly demands for IWs. So I will leave it at that. On here are a few other resources that I referred to in this presentation on statistics and on definitions, as well as our study results. So yeah, thanks very much for having me again.
Many thanks, Sarah. Can you just maybe explain in which cities did you work? The 12 cities are all from the Global South, or also from Europe? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question, Julia. We have 2 cities in Latin America, 4 cities in Africa, 4 cities in Asia, and 1 city in Central Europe, which is Pleven in Bulgaria. And we're looking at New York City as well.
And how did you select the cities, if I may ask?
Yeah, it's a good question. The cities are, several of the cities are ones in which are called WIGO's focal cities. So we have team members there, and they coordinate with local membership-based organizations. The other cities were selected in collaboration with our affiliate organizations, such as StreetNet. And we did make a decision with our affiliates that it would make sense to have a few cities in the global north, because we could see from the very beginning of this crisis that informal workers were going to be affected regardless of whether they were in a city like New York or a city like Dakar, Senegal. So that was.
Thank you. I think this study would be very interesting also for us, also in terms of planning, support, and actions also in the future. So to have this data and to have this overview. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and so the second link I provided here, it has all of the products that have so far come out of the study, and we're continuing to release more. So please do visit the website.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Now we can continue with Oksana Hubbud, which, as I said, is a coordinator of StreetNet International, which is also a member of WIGO, which also will give some more insight about informal workers and also their their coping strategies also during this phase, and what are the key challenges that they're facing every day. Oksana, the floor is yours.
Thank you, dear Julia. Hello, everyone again, and thanks again for giving us the space to once again raise the voice of informal traders, particularly women, because we are StreetNet representing more women since they are more engaged in the sector of commerce. So let me share my screen. Okay, can you see it? Oh. Okay, as I already said, so we are represented in globally in 4 continents and represent more than 600,000 members. And in average, it's from 78 to 90% are women who are our members, but different age, starting from young or young girls, and so we also have elderly or retired women. Once again, I would like to highlight on the issue of informality and how we need really to properly understand it. Because informal economy is not a choice and it is a need, especially now during the crisis of COVID-19, we saw how essential those workers are, which comprised of informal economy. So it's very important to differ informal economy engagement from illegal activity, as previously was already mentioned by Sarah. As for our strategies and advocacy, especially after COVID time period, of course, we strengthened some of focus area of our strategic key priorities. And definitely, first of all, it was right to work in public spaces when a lot of governments, majority of governments in different countries, they impose strict lockdowns, which means no people were allowed to continue to sell on the markets or on the streets. So basically, how to survive, it was also very difficult choice and dilemma, because informal economy workers are those who are not covered by any legal or social protection in their countries. So they simply didn't get any social assistance or any compensation for loss of their income. So for the income security purpose, they continue, especially our affiliates, organizations which had already some established relationship with local authority or municipality. They continue to negotiate how to get a right to work, of course, observing all the preventive measures, wearing masks and using all the PPEs. Provision of public services for all, it was also very crucial, and it was revealed again that very poor access or even lack of access to water, to drinking water, it was a big challenge, because big amount of our members of informal economy workers, they actually live in informal settlements. So very poor public infrastructure was especially in African countries like Nigeria, and we could see all of those gaps and challenges that our members started to face more and more. One of our key priority, and it will be continued, of course, is inclusive social dialogue at all levels, local and national level, when we always push for inclusiveness to be at the table, but not on the table as informal economy when it is coming to discussion of the issues or concerns of informal economy workers. One of key element or component to go out of to plan for economic recovery, it's provision of stimulus packages for informal traders, because it is so important to really assist them with at least minimum what it is possible, so they will just start to resume the economic activity and their work. Universal social protection and healthcare system, again and again, it's very crucial and very relevant issue now when everyone is talking about universality, but how to do it really, how to provide at least the basic social protection or social benefits for all. It's a big issue, but there is discussion and there is space, including fiscal space. It's just about political will, which we also need to fight for and to push for. Shaping a new normal or a new deal, what we can call it, for a new social state model towards achieving social justice and equality. It's maybe more like longer term strategy, but still the crisis is a very good opportunity to really push and enforce these elements which are already existing, but to create a new model which is very workers or human responsive models. Of course, considering already existing international instruments, for example, such as ILO conventions or recommendations, recommendation 204 on transition from informal to formal economy. It really contains good provisions how the transition should be done gradually without harm to livelihood of the workers. Yes, I will be maybe more now specific towards our affiliates and how they responded to COVID-19 crisis, especially those who already faced some challenges before or some kind of crisis, like Sierra Leone, for example. They had Ebola disease in 14-15. So they were really very quick, very mobilized in terms of immediate response. So they started immediately awareness raising campaign among members, but also negotiating with municipality, with local authority, how to really provide safe space for work, to continue work as traders at markets or at the street, but of course to follow all the protocols for pandemic. So it was really good arrangements and not that, let's say, big harm, economic negative harm for the traders.
Oksana, you have 1 minute.
Okay, so yes, so you can see here about those stations at the market, which will also negotiated jointly with the city council, with municipality. And the same issue or good successful example is from Zimbabwe, when they managed to actually establish and sign memorandum of understanding with many local authorities. So just also for the sake of finding good, safe public spaces for allocation of market or street vendors, just to continue their work. Yeah, you can see here. Also other examples from India or El Salvador, when it was good arrangements with our affiliated organizations who approached city councils, local governments, or also national governments, how they can better respond and better provide this kind of income security for the members, for their laws. It was also interesting, innovative, let's say, approach for India, for example, when they started to think about alternative ways of generating income. So it was good, like they started to sew masks to distribute or provide for healthcare workers. So really very innovative approach, and which actually only benefited all. Good example also from New York City, when we have our affiliated organization. So they were actually campaigning for increasing the number of vending permits for the members. And finally, it was in February 2021, when the city council just passed the law. So to increase the number of food vending permits for the vendors. And in April 2021, it's just recently, so it was also another, let's say, victory when they managed to also be the ones who could get some relief as compensation for their loss in New York City. Yeah, it's one of our initiative of StreetNet. So we are cooperating with global platform for the right to the city. So we are also pushing for the issue for the right to the city as a common good. So when everyone has access, has facility to public services and also to public space.
Thank you. Can you focus on the last messages, maybe?
Yes, so here are our last messages. So as it was revealed also, and I already said that to resume the work for our sector, they don't really need a lot of startup capital, let's say. So economic activity can always start more quickly and with smaller capital. So they just need really, let's say, minimum of some support from government just to resume their work in order to sustain and somehow to provide or secure their livelihoods. The transition from informal to formal economy is also a key, and we can really use this time as opportunity to push for gradual transition, which should be based on the ILO recommendation provision 204. And bottom-up approach, of course, towards economic recovery, which should be inclusive, transparent, universally accessible, and non-discriminatory. So we believe in nothing for us without us, and definitely no economic recovery without us.
Thank you, Oksana, also for sharing some concrete example on how women have been really key also during the COVID pandemic in supporting vulnerable communities. This is we have seen also over like during our work in the past year. As I said at the beginning, we worked in different cities and we did urban assessment from a gender perspective. And one of the issues that emerged as one of the challenge and the priorities have been access to land and access to housing for women. So when we talk also about domestic violence or the possibility to control assets from an economic point of view, but also from a personal point of view, safety also point of view is key. So I would like now to give the floor to Alice Verdlich from IAD, and she will focus on this aspect. So on the informality in cities in the spatial terms. So Alice, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Just pull it up. Thanks again for the opportunity. I'm based at IIED in London, and we work quite a bit with networks of the urban poor called Slum Dwellers International. So I'll be drawing upon their work and trying to complement some of the points already made by WeGo and bring out the aspects of women in informal settlements in the global south. Globally, an estimated 1 billion people live in informal settlements, according to the United Nations. These areas vary quite widely, but often have overcrowded housing, inadequate infrastructure and services, insecure tenure, and multiple exclusions, such as political, social, and economic. As many of us know, these areas have been at heightened risk of COVID transmission, given their overcrowded housing and minimal services. And of course, it's extremely difficult to socially distance in such areas. But there is a lack of data on informal settlements and the gender inequitable burdens linked to poor living conditions, which we'll discuss further below. And just to highlight on the right, the levels of informal settlements vary between regions quite a bit. So in Latin America, an estimated 20% of urban residents live in informal settlements, but maybe as high as 56% of urban residents in Africa. Of course, like all figures on informality, these are contested and difficult, but it is to show just how important these are in housing low-income populations in the global south. Moving on to a focus on women and housing and informal settlements. As noted already, women often face discrimination in housing markets and may struggle to access decent shelter, which leads to them being overrepresented in low-quality rental units in the informal market. As noted already, women also predominate as home-based workers or work elsewhere in their neighborhoods as a way of balancing their multiple roles, such as care duties and community management. So in the upper picture, this is from a study that we did on food vendors in Nairobi's informal settlements. And women were overrepresented in many of the sectors, including fresh produce. So you see someone who lives near where she's selling in an internal market in informal settlements. And in the lower picture, we have actually from WeGo, another home-based worker, where again, women are overrepresented. So because of these close links between women and housing, they often depend on housing as a key asset, so that improving shelter, wash, and electricity can particularly benefit women's livelihoods and well-being. As one example, this was actually an EU-funded upgrading project in Zambia. New home-based enterprises were established thanks to the provision of roads, electricity, and water. This led to poverty reduction and gender equality, as it was largely women who created the home-based enterprises in the settlement. Turning now to gender and water and sanitation, there are often clear links between inadequate sanitation and the risk of gender-based violence, as women and girls may risk attacks when walking to public toilets in unsafe settlements, especially late at night. And there's some photos here from Kampala, but this has been documented in many different cities, and it underscores the need for an integrated approach that would provide not only water and sanitation, but also public lighting, footpaths, and efforts to improve safety in informal settlements. At the same time, women and girls are disproportionately affected by the meager water provision, which can lead to lengthy waiting times at public taps that can not only affect school attendance and earnings, but also mental health and stress. These findings are from an Indian city of Ahmedabad, where in 5 different settlements, which are listed here, women would average 2 hours a day of collecting water, and to a lesser extent girls, but overwhelmingly in these areas, it was women who would have to queue for water. But after these settlements were upgraded, the time saved would be used for housework or income generation or leisure, and there were benefits in terms of reduced stress and better hygiene. I want to turn briefly now to Slum Dwellers International, which is a network active in 32 nations with women-led savings groups, and grassroots data collection is key to their movement. They've developed a range of shelter interventions that would include inclusive building standards such as smaller plot sizes, support for incremental construction of housing, and upgrading strategies, including with city authorities that are increasingly reaching citywide scale and setting important precedents about how to promote equitable cities. And these improvements, given how poor sanitation, poor infrastructure more generally, and housing often affect women disproportionately. And by the same token, improving housing and infrastructure can especially benefit women and girls. So on the right here, we have a photo of how community-led data collection, often at the house-to-house level, or profiling informal settlements at the city level, can provide the basis for future advocacy and these inclusive interventions. And also, as mentioned, given the challenges of COVID in informal settlements, women and other grassroots-led movements have been key to providing emergency responses, such as distributing relief, establishing community kitchens, improving access to hand washing facilities, as well as advocating for better services, helping to promote upgrading. So there have been a range of, as we've seen, both crisis and opportunity in the context of COVID. And it's often women-led grassroots organizations that are taking the lead in this response. Just turning briefly to some recommendations, which I think underscore a lot of what's been said already. The impacts of inadequate housing, services, and infrastructure often disproportionately affect women and girls. We've seen that disaggregated data are still needed to uncover these burdens and any intersectional disadvantages based on disability, ethnicity, migration status beyond just gender and age. And there are important possibilities of inclusive, holistic upgrading interventions that can support health, gender equity, and well-being, including in the context of COVID, building on the long-standing partnerships that SDI and other groups have established to help provide better housing, which has only taken on greater urgency at the moment. In doing so, there's a need to develop appropriate, flexible standards with women and other vulnerable groups in informal settlements, and to use participatory approaches that can help in designing and implementing these strategies. A bit more information, I'd encourage you to learn more about SDI. Environment and Urbanization is a journal that my organization puts out, and we have an array of articles on gender and intersectionality that I think would be quite relevant. And of course, feel free to contact me. Stop there, and thanks very much again.
Many thanks, Alice. Also to mention the work of SDI, that is also our member. We are working with them very closely in the country, in the cities where we are active. So I'm very glad that you mentioned their important work. I would like to now give the floor to Maria Isabel Weiser, the Vice Director of 4House think tank. I think it's important here to also mention that the issues that have been mentioned by colleagues from WIGO, StreetNet International, IAD are also important also for the European context, no? So also the European Union also adopted the EU gender strategy, and the aspect of informality, informal economy, informal living is also a reality for women living in Europe. So really a global strategy, global effort on this topic, I think is required. So I leave the floor to Maria to talk more about this issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia, and thank you so much for inviting me to this interesting talk. I've been listening. It's very fascinating also to hear all the aspects that my colleagues have mentioned. I will try to share my screen so that you can, so does that work? And put the on presentation mode. Okay. Can you see it like this? Does that work? Okay. So I will talk a bit about one aspect that we haven't touched upon yet so far, and that's the problem or the issue of women that are actually, that have been working at home and in their families during the COVID crisis. And as Julia has mentioned, the problem of informality is not specific to other countries, so it's also a reality in European countries. So even though the European Union ranks relatively good in gender equality, but the political representation, for instance, of women is actually going back. So there is actually not really a progress seen right now, especially during the COVID crisis. Gender equality issues have come up again. It's going to take much more time than expected to reach the gender parity. And it's become even worse with the COVID crisis. And also another problem is that the labor market remains very gendered also in Europe. So you have now you have highly educated women actually entering the workforce, but at the same time, their household chores are delegated or outsourced to other women, and it's mostly women, and these jobs as cleaning or childcare remain extremely gendered. And the problem that is that households that working in private households, for instance, for elderly care, for childcare, for cleaning, these are usually jobs that are informal and that are in a legal gray zone, so they are less protected. And we've heard this; it's also valid for Europe. You also have the problem that there is a lack of unions to protect these women, or they are less organized. And this also leads to less stable contracts or lower salaries. And you could actually really see this during the pandemic. So when women were actually on the forefront when it came to responding to the crisis, and they filled more jobs than men that required personal contact. So they were usually the ones taking care of sick people, taking care of elderly people. But at the same time, their overrepresentation in lower paid sectors such as hospitality, retail, or personal services made them much more vulnerable to the crisis. And while female employment rates dropped slightly during the crisis, service sectors that have not been disrupted, such as communications or finance, are mostly done by men, so they have actually had an increase in employment rates. So already there you can see, and especially in the US, they realized that actually there were more, only women that had lost jobs, and the jobs that were gained were actually gained by men. But put aside the problem of a gendered labor market, what I would like to focus on a bit is actually the household and the work that is done by women, equally by women that are working, and highly qualified women and women that are less qualified. And you can see in this picture, this is from 2016, from the Global Gender Gap Index, and you can see this is an average working day for men and the women when you calculate their actual paid labor and what they work in the household. And so you can see the participation time per day in the household and family care. That's from 2008 to 2015. You can see it by the European, you can see the different European countries. So there are some barriers, for instance, in Norway. You wonder who comes up for the rest of the time. They seem to have much less time spent on household, whereas in Italy, for example, women are predominantly working in the households, contrary to men. So this is the figures in normal time. So what's part of this? So you have childcare, of course, you care for the sick and the elderly, but you also have a whole aspect of emotional support. Taking care of the children is not just making sure that they stay alive, but it's also being there to comfort them, giving advice. And then there is the whole part of mental load that has become a very prominent topic, where the whole management of the household is basically something that needs to be done by someone, and this is usually done by the women in the household. And then you have also the unpaid domestic work, such as cleaning, cooking, the whole admin work that mustn't be forgotten. You have to pay the bills, you have to coordinate the calendars and all these things. So these are a bit the tasks that are part of this course. So if you compare the time spent on coordinating or on taking care of the whole household, you can see between pre-COVID, these were roughly a bit more than 15 hours a week. So this is in a week that was done by women, and men it was about 6 hours a week. As you can see, it has actually equalized a bit. Men are taking much more on, have taken much more on in Europe during the crisis, but women as well, it has gone up to almost 18 hours a week. And here there is the huge problem that during COVID, women kept doing all the tasks they did. But there are some aspects that have been very important. For instance, there is the addition that facilities to take care of disabled children, for instance, closed down. So when you have a disabled child, you had to take them home, you had to take care of them. Even though if you were working, you still had to take care of those children. The schools closed, you had to do homeschooling, all the children's facilities closed down, so you had to take care of small children. You had to juggle work and childcare. And this was predominantly, there were lots of men involved, but the work was predominantly done by women as well. And also one very important aspect is that lots of women lived in hostile environments, and if you had disputes at home, if you had domestic violence, this was also an added task or an added burden that was more severe on women than on men. And you had also, I mean, everybody has seen the children coming in during conferences and calls. So this is also an aspect you can't really work and focus if you have a child running around. And then for the unpaid domestic work again, well, there was additional cleaning with all the bacteria, with the whole scare There are additional sanitary measures, so this is an added task. And also a point that is important and is probably underestimated, all the financial aid that was provided, you had to apply you had to fill out forms. This was a whole process, this whole bureaucracy is another task, and is also, it's just another task for the household management. So what solution is there? So there has been a really innovative idea in Belgium. They introduced a service voucher to actually, with the idea to make this informal work formal. So they were talking not about the work done by mothers or wives, but they are talking about women, predominantly women in their 40s and up, that were out of the workforce, and to reintroduce them into the workforce. They gave out vouchers with that you could buy online. It was a private firm. It's a private firm. It still exists. You can buy vouchers, and with those vouchers, they're subsidized by Belgium, and you can buy those vouchers, and with it the service of people that are coming and helping you with the household. This has two positive aspects. On the one hand, you reintroduce women into the workforce, and you make them actually formal work, because they are employed by an employee. And at the same time, women that are working can actually access help much cheaper than they would normally.
You have 1 minute to conclude.
Perfect. There is, what policy solutions are there? So one point is to ensure affordable childcare. So this is one point that comes up all the time. If you can put your children into an affordable and also practical childcare, this gives mothers more space to actually go to work and to handle their tasks. Then you can encourage fathers to take time off for their children, because if fathers, studies have shown that if fathers are engaged with their children in the early times of education, they keep taking care of their children much more during their while they grow up. And one important aspect is also that you ensure a comfortable work-life balance for families. And studies have shown also that children that have had mothers that work, so girls that had mothers that work, are much more likely to actually work part-time at least, or even more. And boys that actually have mothers that had worked have shown that they are more engaged in household chores. So this is to conclude, and I leave the floor to you, Julia.
Thank you, Maria. I think this shows also the complexity when we talk about ghost citizens and invisible work. This is another area of invisibility of, in fact, women work, and also economic contribution to also city life and country economy. We have received a series of questions that I would like to share with the panelists. The first one, I think, is more for Mrs. Isaacson. What are the next key political moments, especially from the EU perspective, where we can really promote gender equality into multilateral action? I'm also thinking about the EU-African Union Summit that will take place probably this year, how we can make sure that the gender equality stays in the agenda, also knowing that, of course, there are some differences also between how European Union intend gender equality and how the African Union intend gender equality. So there are also cultural differences, but how we can make sure that stays, and what are the other key political moments where also us as different organizations can also participate and support also your action. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. No, I think there are multiple and very many occasions where actually this can be done. perhaps not on daily basis, but almost at daily basis, because you referred to the African Summit, but you know, we also have other regional contexts within which we work, and we have, for example, the ASEAN meeting coming up, and we have the G7 ministerial meetings coming up, etc., etc. So there are many opportunities on the political side where we will promote our important, very important in these times, message and commitment at political and all other levels as well. So of course, that said, and then of course we have the regular, how should I say, calendar of the United Nations with the General Assembly. We have, of course, other occasions also throughout the year. We also have, of course, very good friends and partners in different sort of UN shapes, such as, you know, EU member state like Ireland now in the UN Security Council, etc., where they were organizing an area formula meeting on the 8th of March, not on the topic particularly of this, you know, meeting today, but still it's really, you know, women's empowerment and gender equality at the front and center. So there are a multiple of occasions like that. And then of course, least but not last, last but not least, sorry, I mixed it up, the Generation Equality Forum, which is a very promising, as you know, initiative where the Mexico Forum took place just the other week, and the Paris Forum is coming up in the summer, and where all the 6 action coalitions, as well as the Compact on Women, Peace and Security and Humanitarian Action, are really, you know, getting up, you know, speed, and the forum in Mexico was very inspiring and very promising in so many ways. So I think also, of course, generation equality is one, and I think I stop there, but that doesn't mean that everything I didn't mention is not equally promising and important too.
Thank you, Charlotte. We have another question. Says that public authorities are often reluctant to the involvement of informal workers or in general to consider informality and their policies. How could we get them involved or interested on this? Is there any specific project action? I'd like to ask this to, maybe we can start with Oksana, then Alice, very shortly, like a concrete example. Oksana.
Yes, thank you, Julia, and thanks for this very important question, because this is the area what we are also promoting. It's again about inclusiveness, about inclusive social dialogue. And first of all, it should be recognition of such workers at national level and at local governmental levels, just how essential they are. Because if we are talking, for example, about the African economy, so it's informal economy, because in average it's 87% of African economy is informal. So how we can really treat the issue of informality as a norm, a current norm, and take it more seriously. So it's also about mind shift, how we can really, redirect or reorient our thinking and our approaches. It's about joint negotiation or developing trades-off, so which could benefit all. And in the times of crisis, there are many examples where organizations of informal economy workers, they really became those facilitators or ambassadors of information raising or awareness raising campaigns about how it is important to be protected, how the virus is serious. So they are really those ambassadors, and they are part of solution, but not part of problem. And this is a very important message that we need also to promote at all levels. And there is recognition of this particular category of workers at international level. And a lot of many or majority of governments, they actually supported the ILO recommendation 204 on transition from informal to formal economy, which really is good because it has gradual transition steps or provisions, how to do the informal to formal these arrangements in the way which is not harming the livelihood of informal economy workers. So it's about political will again, but really it's good opportunity, because this is a time when we rearranging or inventing new policies or equipping existing policies to make it more universal, including to implement ILO recommendation 202 on social protection floors, which is really very good instrument because it shows about life cycle social protection for the humans. So yeah, even though they are not legally binding documents, but it could be also treated as advantage, because we don't need this long process of ratification as convention, even though we are also pushing for ratification of the ILO Convention 190 on elimination of violence and harassment in the field of work, which also covers informal economy workers.
Thank you, Oksana. Alice, you want to complement?
Yes, I'll do my best. I want to speak actually about a good practice that's been emerging in Nairobi, where the Slum Dwellers International affiliate was able to get the county government to agree to upgrade an informal settlement at a much bigger scale and much more inclusive and holistic than had been done to date. So it's benefiting 100,000 households on private land that was quite contested. And yet they were able, through some action research partnerships, to quantify the amount of money that informal service providers were already providing in this settlement of Mukuru, and show a poverty penalty as well, like that people were paying more for lower quality services. But this also, by the same token, showed that they were able to pay for provision. And through lots of advocacy over many years, there were lots of different tactics used, including protests and more constructive engagement with county government, and lots of action research. I can't do justice to, but I'm going to put a link to a report if you're interested on this upgrading. So I think the key components that I just want to highlight now were that there was ample data on informality in this settlement, including service provision and housing provision, that it was largely informal. There were really strong research partnerships that benefited from long-term engagement between local academics and SDI. And this all led to a really meaningful engagement with the county government, and through, again, I can't go into all the details, but through a multi-consortia approach where they worked with county officials, designed over several years a really inclusive and quite pioneering approach to upgrading. It's still underway, but it is being implemented even in the context of COVID. So I think it is one really important example of how to use data on informality and long-term engagement to support meaningful change.
Thank you, Alice. Yes, we know also Jane Wero that was leading, and she was telling us about the piloting approach. She was starting from bringing also the impact, showing the data, and then scaling up. Thank you for this. Maybe Virginia, what is the experience, your experience, the experience of you with creating local partnerships, supporting local partnership between government and other organizations, academia, or associations or NGOs that can you share with us?
Yes, I will try to see what could be relevant to the question. The question is a bit specific. We support REFELA. Do you know what's REFELA? So we have a partnership agreement with the network of locally elected women in Africa. And so they have funding, and they have also, they belong to this the Union for Cities for Africa, ULCG.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just looked at their organization chart and discovered they have a gender department. So we have fixed a meeting to see what they do, but I'm very fascinated by the work they do. I think there is a huge potential to see, because they also develop local approaches, territorial development. So I think this is it's a great partner. So we try to make this partnership work for GAP3. Many of you since I am not been in the urban development sector, many of you might have heard about the project implemented by UN Habitat on strengthening the role of women and girls in participatory slum upgrading program. So this is a program which started in 2008. So it's already in phase 3. So it's impressive. A long life for a project means that it runs well. And in fact, the results are impressive. So I think it touched around 4 million people. And it ensures representation of women in the design and implementation of activity in upgrading also the governance system, protecting against eviction, improving living conditions. So this is clearly an example of a multi-stakeholder partnership at big scale. And then there is another very interesting example. It's called Better Work. So Better Work program is a partnership between ILO and International Finance Corporation in order to respect labor rights for workers, for women in the garment industry. And it works at 3 levels, at factory level, at country level, and at global level. So global level, so working with global brands on their practices. At country level, supporting the government labor inspector, for example, to adopt and enforce labor laws for women, social dialogue, labor rights application, and then at factory level, so clearly with women on awareness raising, knowledge development, and dialogue. So this is a big program because it already touched almost 2 million women and 1,700 factories. So it's running. And then to give a very, to go into the micro, I was reading about an interesting example of a new program on digital who created in Kenya a platform for supporting a transition from informal to the formal sector. 40% of participants are women, so they help them use the digital world to improve their situation and on the job market. And so it's a startup, but apparently it works well and is part of a digital 2 for Equal. So it's about a stakeholder partnership with a digital sector that I think it's interesting for Africa these days. So we have also to bring together the digital, the informal, and the gender. I don't want to take too much of your time.
Thank you. Raffaella, by the way, is also our member, and we have been working in Gambia. We are working in Banjul, and the mayor of Banjul is the first woman elected mayor in the country, and she's also the president of the Raffaella network. So we work.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay, so we can maybe we can organize something together. Maybe.
Yes. We are. We can also share the work that we have been doing in Gambia, and we are planning to do. I think it'd be very interesting. It's an interesting country in terms of gender and gender equality. Thank you. I think also you kind of respond also a bit to another question that we got, that was really about how we can ensure a transition between formal and informal economy, and maybe what would be the role of the private sector. I don't know if or either you or Oksana, do you want to comment briefly on that, the role of private sector in the transition, because you already mentioned the importance of the transition. No, if Virginia or
yeah, no, I think I can just say that we very much try to work with the private sector on gender, and we are in contact with many actors, and we would like to really genderize the way that all these blending operation guarantees are working, and we have found a lot of stakeholder and allies. All these organizations have a gender department, so with gender experts who fight for it. So we are trying to build alliance with them, and then of course the name of the game is to get really into their system, so the decision-making process, the template they have to fill, and we are working for it. So and there is a lot of opening and interest, and I feel that a lot of work has been done in the last years, and now we see that they are already aware and really they want to this investment done in the last 5-10 years to now give its fruits.
Thank you. Yes, I don't know, Oksana, also Maria, you also mentioned the example from Belgium. One of you can want to come in and comment on this question?
Yeah, maybe just to emphasize that there is a need to really build alliances and unite among all workers, whatever you are, whatever you represent. And ideally, of course, if trade unions could also recognize, let's say, informal economy workers, and who can be also part from worker side at tripartite national dialogue on national setups. This is really ideal option, but there should be common understanding and common grounds. And mainly also because our sector, majority of them are self-employed workers. So they are not really considered as working for government. So they are just like private individual entrepreneurs, let's say, but it's petty traders. So that's why there is a need for recognition as workers and to have more workers' rights approach. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe just to add to that, I mean, the problem I think is that lots of the work that is informal is work that has just been done by women in their role as women so far. And that's also the reason why this has not, until now, it has not been formalized. And I think there is also not really a push towards actually formalizing them, because it's still regarded as something that's just done, you know, like doing the household, you still think, okay, well, it's just cleaning the kitchen, or it's just taking care of children is a really good example. It's still considered to be something that's very easy to do, that just a mother just knows how to do, or a woman just knows how to do it. And I think as long as it's seen just like this, it's very important to actually emphasize that there is a real need to formalize these kind of jobs.
Yeah, thank you. That is, I think, an interesting, very complex question. How do we address the issues of power relations, shifting from the perspective that sees women as simple beneficiaries and victims to the one that includes really their voices as active stakeholders? I don't know who wants to, maybe Charlotte, you want to comment on this question? Perspective.
Sorry, could you repeat it? Because I just wrote the message that I'm going to another meeting, so I was a little bit distracted. Sorry.
Sorry.
Tell me
So
again.
the question is really how to change the way we look at women. So from beneficiaries and victims to protect.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's the $100 million question, of course. But I think I'm sure it can be done. I think it is, of course, about us all, starting as always when we want to make a transformation, to start with yourself and to make sure that we are not reinforcing those stereotypes, because also among you know, good friends in the gender community, we can also hear some stereotypical thinking being reproduced, you know, about what women should do and what men should do and not do, etc., etc. And I think we have we have quite a lot of trainings now, I think, not only in the European Union, but also in other places that are addressing this sort of, you know, a little bit unconscious bias. And this is part of the puzzle. It's not the whole puzzle. So, you know, I think personally that we have to, because the policy framework is clear, you know, so that's done. But now all of us, you know, no matter what we are doing, we have to become those, you know, critical friends to each other. We also have to remind each other where we might actually sometimes reproduce, you know, a narrative or a sort of a projection of women as victims. But I want to finally say one thing, and that is that it's not one or the other, because, you know, you can be actually victims but still being an agent and have a lot of agency. So it's not necessarily a binary, and I think that is also important to acknowledge. And you can actually go in and out from you can be a very strong agent and very powerful in, you know, like in your workplace, and then when you go home to your private sphere, it might be a different situations. So these differences, I think we also need to acknowledge. So I think this question really points in a direction where actually all of us as a community and also outside our community need to help each other. And we have in our policy quite clear wordings and writings about that. For example, I just want to give an example. In our Women, Peace and Security policy, we say that, yeah, we have to promote to have more women and more gender balance and women in leadership positions, etc. But that cannot be done through reproducing stereotypes about women, because we have been seeing that a few times being done. So we also need to be just, you know, awake. Thank you.
But this is also, I think this is also true when we look at city planning, no? Because the way women use cities is very different, but we can reproduce this gender stereotypes. So like, for example, the use of public transport, you know? So we really have to work on different levels. Now, women tend to do multiple stops, men normally commute more. So I think we have to, like Anne Hidalgo, the mayor of Paris, think about more the 15-minute cities, more activities really at the neighborhood level, having this approach, mixed approach. But at the same time, we have to work on the cultural level, really on the political level, on the leadership. So I see it also in the city level. Thank you. I don't know if anyone wants to comment on this, come in on this question. Otherwise, I would like just to, I have a final question either to Charlotte or Virginia. One, Virginia, you mentioned 85% of the projects, the future projects of the EU will be focusing on, will have one of the major objectives related to gender equality. It's not clear in terms of budget. Is there also a budget related to that, like a percentage, or no? Just a number of projects?
But we will also track the increase in the volume. But we don't have a fixed target, a quantitative target. But we are tracking it.
And is there any conversation, especially at the delegation level, to use gender-sensitive budgeting approach also?
Gender-sensitive budgeting is part of GAP3, and there are also targets on it in terms of support to public finance management, training, and so whenever we do support to public financial management, we also promote gender-responsive budgeting. And our colleagues working on this in budget support are really, really committed. So we see things are moving there, and
this is key.
Yeah, it's key, and should be done also. I've seen that in your presentation, you also do this. So we like also to do at city level, and so we can speak on it.
Yes, for sure.
Are keen to promote it. Yeah.
Thank you. And Charlotte, maybe also this question, you mentioned specific instrument really to support local actions. Can you just really briefly mention it also for our colleagues from WIGO and
No, honestly, I think on financial instruments, it's certainly our colleagues in the Commission who are, more versed to speak about that. But of course, we have one instrument, which is the instrument of contributing. So if it is a city or an urban area in sort of, a fragile setting, of course, the instrument contributing to stability and peace could be one. Sure. Because the thing is that the thing is with that instrument is that random applications are constantly considered So I can send a page on that. And then of course we have the tender system, you know, which is bigger. And then you can also search like on funding programs and instruments, etc. But so sometimes there are specific calls and sometimes, you know, there are other options. But again, this is really for Commission colleagues and not so much for me. This is almost everything I know about it.
I think there has been also recently a call now for sustainable cities led by INPA, I think, also focusing on really on the local level. So I think I could also a bit wrap up the session. I think it has been extremely interesting, also specific, talking about this specific issue, and has been also extremely informative. And I really, really thanks all the speakers for being here. It was quite diverse, but really, really informative. And we are, I would like to share maybe, let's see if I can share my screen. Yes, like this. Yeah, I just to conclude, maybe I just summarize few points that also emerged from the different presentations. I think this has been when we talk about how to support women living in condition of poverty and informality in cities, the aspect of awareness raising, knowledge, and facilitating networking has been raised as very important. The second aspect is data, has been mentioned, gender disaggregated data and analysis. From our work in cities, this is always missing, so we don't know what women think, and especially qualitative data is missing. And involving also women in this process is key in sharing their experience and contributing to the collection of gender disaggregated data. The third aspect, I think Alice mentioned it, but also Virginia, the knowledge hubs. At the local level, involving different actors and together with a policymaker across the level to work together is also key, and is also been mentioned by Oksana. So how to convince, to reply to the question, how to convince also local government to pay attention to the issue of informality, so data and knowledge. Then, of course, the support to informal workers and organizations such as StreetNet International through capacity building, technical assistance, and research. And then the capacity also of local and regional institutions to implement gender-sensitive city planning, and especially, for example, wash facilities, public spaces and transport, they really look and address gender discrimination. So capacity is really key. No, so gender budgeting, but we can see that also capacity, how to do a participatory city planning. We are working now in Tunisia. There is, it's a country with a big history in terms of gender equality, but still they are also, their process of centralization is quite new. So local authority needs to be supported on this. The legislation that Oksana mentioned, no? So really recognitions of rights of people living in informal context, working informally. And also, I think Maria mentioned that. And then the last one, really the aspect of harassment and violence that has been mentioned both by Sarah and Oksana, needs to be really at the center of our actions and policies, especially protecting informal workers and women through awareness campaigns and through educations, what also WIGO is doing and SDI are doing. More or less, I think this is our, I think the key messages that we have collected from your input and presentation. Next step for us, we will coordinate a policy brief on this topic so on the gender action plan and how this can really address and be translated at the local level to address the specific issues of women living in the context of informality. And of course, we are happy to engage with all of you on also the country level on specific and practical project and actions. So I thank you again, and it has been a pleasure, and we will we'll be in touch in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Very interesting.
You.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Thank you very
Bye.
much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.